think we're live now. Greetings to you all and a very warm welcome to this session. I am honored to be your moderator. My name is Jennifer Lipenga and I'm a feminist from Malawi, and I also work as a program associate with an organization called For Equality. Joining me on this virtual stage is a panel of phenomenal women from across the globe who've dedicated their lives to make this world safer for women and girls. So welcome to all our panelists and all our audience. So feel free to interact with the Q&A on your screen. You will also be given an opportunity to interact with the panelists using this channel. So this morning's session will focus on the crisis of gender-based violence against women and girls in the context of COVID-19. And our goal is to create global and innovative multi-stakeholder recommendations related to the prevention and response to gender-based violence against women and girls, and also to promote access to justice, especially in this time of COVID-19. So it has been 26 years since the Beijing Platform of Action was formulated, when governments, activists, and intergovernmental representatives made a commitment to achieve gender equality and women empowerment. And this was also because it is known that violence against women and girls is a barrier to a safer, peaceful, and an equal world. And this is why ending violence against women and girls is one of the key areas of focus in the Beijing Platform of Action. But it's been decades. Until today, 1 in 3 women experience some form of sexual or physical violence, and 15 million adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 have experienced some form of forced sex, and 200 million girls and women alive today have undergone female genital mutilation. So we can see that violence against women and girls is a pandemic on its own, and it has been faced by another pandemic, COVID-19. And what COVID-19 has really done is to expose pre-existing inequalities, but it has also intensified those inequalities. And we know this because right now, since the onset of COVID-19, 243 million women and girls aged 15 to 49 have been subjected to sexual or physical violence by their intimate partner. And also because now our interactions are happening virtually, we've also seen a 73% increase in online violence faced by women and girls. So we know that now more than ever, it is time for strong, comprehensive, and intersectional commitments to make this world safer for women and girls. And today I was just told that the president of Turkey has made a decision to withdraw from the Council of Europe on Prevention and Combating Violence Against Women and Girls and on Domestic Violence, the Istanbul Convention. So this is a huge setback because this is one of the instruments, just like the Beijing Platform of Action, it provides a roadmap for the elimination of gender-based violence against women and girls. And before we start this session, I would like to share a message of solidarity to women and girls facing violence in their homes, in their communities, and public spaces, in the workplace. I want you to know that I think of you. I also think of women and girls in Myanmar. Many in the UN have expressed deep concern over the situation in Myanmar and the targeted and disproportionate violence against women being recorded. Aligned with solidarity with all those protesting against this repressive response, we think of you and we dedicate this panel to all the victims and the survivors and the tremendous resilient women and girls across the world. So our session today has been divided into 3 parts. We're first going to look at our situation since Beijing in terms of violence against women and girls, and then we'll look at some of the key priorities and actions needed. And finally, we're going to have a Q&A session where the panelists will address questions and comments made in the Q&A chat, and they will also share a 1-minute key innovative solution and approach for ending violence against women and girls. So please join us in sharing your questions, comments in writing in the Q&A chat. We look forward to reading your thoughts and dynamic exchanges. So without wasting too much time, I would like to introduce to you our panel today. Before we start, I would also like to apologize to the panelists if I get the pronunciations wrong. So we have Dubravka Simonovic, who is a special rapporteur on violence against women, its causes and consequences. Fabiola Alanis Zamano, Commissioner on the Prevention and Eradication of Violence Against Women, Mexico. Rocio Rosero, Women's Rights Defenders in Latin America, Ecuador. Sarah Schlitz, State Secretary for Gender Equality, Equal Opportunity and Diversity in Belgium. Honorable Justice Zuone Ntaba, who is a High Court Judge at the Office of the Chief Justice in the Republic of Malawi. Hina Anani, the founder and director, Aban Lebanon. Catalina Devantas Aquila, Ambassador of Costa Rica to the United Nations. Celine Bonner, Executive Director, Caring Foundation. And lastly, we have Jaha Dukure, UN Women Goodwill Regional Ambassador for Africa, and the founder and Executive Director of Safe Hands for Girls, Gambia. So welcome to you once again, our panelists. Please feel free to share your ideas. So to start our session, as we've seen, violence against women and girls still exists. I just explained earlier that 1 in 3 women and girls experience some form of physical or sexual violence. And this is even 26 years after the Beijing Platform of Action. And we've also seen that because of COVID-19, the situation has worsened for women and girls with an increase in cases of domestic violence. So I think that before we start to formulate solutions, it's important that we look at our current situation, our current context in comparison to 1995 when the Beijing Platform of Action was formulated. So my first question would like to go to Dubravka Simonovic, who is a Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Its Causes and Consequences, to share with us the current context compared to 1995 in terms of gender-based violence against women and girls. So the floor is yours to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to participate at this important panel and to reply on this question, how the gender-based violence context has changed since the creation of Beijing Platform for Action. I have participated at the Beijing conference as a member of delegation of my country, Croatia, and for many years after this conference, a prominent slogan, women's rights are human rights, provided a short summary of what the Beijing Platform for Action was, is, and should be. We have to remember and recall that among 12 critical areas of concern, specific area is addressing violence against women, and paragraph 112 provides that violence against women both violates and impairs or nullifies the enjoyment by women of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Beijing Platform for Action also refers to my mandate of a Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Its Causes and Consequences, that was established 1 year before the Beijing conference. So in past 26 years since the conference, after the conference, the Women's Human Rights Framework has been upgraded and expanded by the CEDAW Optional Protocol, jurisprudence of the CEDAW Committee in individual cases and inquiries. I was also a member of the CEDAW Committee for 3 terms, and adoption of General Recommendations 19 and 35 that upgraded General Recommendation 19 on violence against women. So before the Beijing Platform for Action, we had as instruments Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, CEDAW Convention as the first one from 79. Then we also had CEDAW Committee. We had Belém do Pará as a regional convention. We had my mandate, and we have a Special Rapporteur on Women's Rights from Inter-American System. After that, after the Beijing conference, this framework was upgraded in terms of instruments and monitoring mechanisms. So we had the Maputo Protocol adoption in 2003, Istanbul Convention adoption in 2011, that was mentioned in introductory statement, now ratified by 34 states. Then MESECVI was established, monitoring body under Belém do Pará. GRAVIO was established as a monitoring body of under the Istanbul Convention. African Special Rapporteurs on Women's Rights was established in 98, and the Working Group on Discriminatory Laws Against Women and Girls, UN Special Procedure, was established in 2010. So today we have 7 expert monitoring mechanisms, 3 at the UN level, 4 at regional levels, that entrusted to provide recommendations on elimination of violence against women and girls. This today, so we have to see that in addition to Beijing Platform for Action, we have to jointly use CEDAW Convention, Istanbul Convention, Belém do Pará, Maputo, and recommendations issued by those monitoring mechanisms, including my mandate. And let me now briefly mention that since the Beijing conference, my mandate that was established 1 year before the conference, elaborated a number of reports. My mandate visited 61 countries. I have visited myself 10 states, and my mandate altogether elaborated and presented 36 thematic reports. Out of that, I have elaborated 11 reports, all using international human rights framework and recommending measures at national and international level based on human rights framework. Let me mention that this is all those recommendations are testimony of change context of gender-based violence against women. For example, mandates strongly focused on a due diligence responsibility of governments to prevent violence against women and girls, protect victims, and punish perpetrators. I have also launched a femicide watch for prevention of femicides or gender-related killings of women. We need to know that under current data, out of those women, of all persons killed in the context of intimate partner killings, more than 80% of victims are women. Now I'm also looking into my new report that is address rape as a human rights violation, and it is also important to see how to prevent rapes and also look into possibility of establishment of rape watch observatories. So altogether we can see positive trends, but we have also see negative trends. Positive trends are related to women's marches, more knowledge, Ni Una Menos movement, Me Too movement, Break the Silence movement, and so on. Women are claiming their rights. On the other hand, we have pushback movements and negative trends against human rights instruments on women's rights and gender equality. And there is also shrinking space for civil society. We are also seeing that women's rights are not strongly addressed as a human rights today. So we have to go back to human rights framework. And recently, this platform of 7 United Nations and regional expert mechanisms called for violence against women to be standing agenda item before the session of the CSW every year. Also, there are new forms of violence against women, and I have addressed in my reports online violence against women, then violence against women during the childbirth, or obstetric violence, violence against women in politics, and violence against women journalists, and also what is topic of today, this intersection between COVID-19 pandemic and violence against women as another ongoing pandemic. And today we are struggling with both pandemics. We have vaccine against the COVID pandemic, but this vaccine is not properly distributed and we are not seeing results as they should be. But what is with vaccine against the gender-based violence against women and girls? And here I'm also seeing a vaccine. We do have vaccine. We do have international human rights instruments addressing women's rights and violence against women, but they are not ratified by all, so we need universal ratification and we need their full implementation. So to conclude, let me mention that Gender Equality Forum should also use and include in outcome documents this human rights framework and use also references to mandates like CEDAW and my mandate, since we were also referred in a Beijing Platform for Action. I would like to recall that Generation Equality Forum should uphold and upgrade the Beijing Platform for Action. I hope the Generation Equality Forum should uphold women's rights as human rights, but also upgrade violence against women and give it priority in order to really focus on prevention and combating gender-based violence against women and girls as a human rights violation and main obstacle for achieving generation equality everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for highlighting that women's rights are human rights and that we do have a vaccine for ending violence against women and girls. We have all these instruments that were put in place to help us to end violence against women and girls. So thank you so much. And now I'd like to move on to a country-specific context. We know that many countries have experienced a spike in cases of domestic violence since the onset of the pandemic, and Mexico is one of these countries. So I'd like to invite Fabiola Alanis Samano, who is the Commissioner on the Prevention and Eradication of Violence Against Women, to share with us how the context has changed in Mexico since 1995.
Ay, sí, gracias. Bueno. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de participar en este gran evento. Y bueno, decir que en los últimos 25 años el frenético ritmo de los cambios tecnológicos y sus repercusiones en la sociedad provocan que 25 años hoy en día sean muy diferentes a 25 años del siglo XVIII o siglo XIX e incluso de la primera mitad del siglo XX. Durante estos 25 años el mundo ha cambiado sensiblemente y nuestro país ha experimentado cambios notables. Sin duda, hay avances en la conquista de espacios para las mujeres. En parte, la aplicación de la plataforma se ha cumplido. Sin embargo, no ha sido cabal y de hecho, en cierto sentido, en nuestro país, porque en algunas regiones las condiciones de las mujeres no son como quisiéramos. No es posible entender las condiciones de nuestro país si no consideramos el factor del crimen organizado. Aunado a él, avanzó la corrupción en los gobiernos de varios estados, de muchos municipios y a nivel federal. Hubo una trama perversa que alió al crimen organizado con los delincuentes de cuello blanco y el proceso de privatización de la riqueza nacional. En suma, esto significó el establecimiento de poderes fácticos que se consolidaban mientras crecía el deterioro social. En estas condiciones, la situación real de las mujeres empeoró. Hemos empezado a reconstruir a la sociedad y al Estado, pero los resultados ahora son más positivos. Como es lógico, no se pueden traducir de la noche a la mañana los esfuerzos y ver los resultados en el corto plazo. Nuestras prioridades como gobierno, el gobierno de la Cuarta Transformación, son la contención y la atención inmediata de la violencia contra las mujeres. La contención implica detener el aumento cuantitativo y la expansión cualitativa de la violencia contra las mujeres. No obstante, la crisis económica y de salud que atravesamos ha incrementado, a pesar de eso, el gobierno de la Cuarta Transformación ha incrementado los recursos que se destinan a los centros de justicia para las mujeres y también los que están orientados a la atención a los refugios para las mujeres que viven violencia. De igual manera, hemos fortalecido y ampliado el mecanismo de alerta de violencia de género y también contamos como una medida innovadora con mesas de acceso a la justicia en la mayor cantidad de los estados de la República. Decir entonces que, en efecto, la COVID-19 agudizó los problemas estructurales que veníamos padeciendo como sociedad. Eso tiene que tomarse en cuenta cuando nos interrogamos sobre la manera particularmente severa que la enfermedad ha golpeado y ha pegado a las y los mexicanos. Los indicadores señalan que la violencia contra las mujeres se ha incrementado durante la pandemia. Localizamos dos causales principales. Los factores psicológicos asociados con el encierro, como la depresión, la ansiedad, el estrés, que agudizan las tensiones dentro de los hogares y también la pérdida de estabilidad económica de millones de hogares, resultado, como sabemos, de la semiparalización generada por la pandemia. Esto me da oportunidad para expresar que las estrategias y acciones concretas para prevenir, atender, sancionar y erradicar la violencia de género serán insuficientes si no atendemos las causas profundas que la nutren. Por tanto, las estrategias derivadas de la Declaración y Plataforma de Acción de Beijing deben estar inscritas en el marco de transformación integral que repercuta en las causas estructurales profundas que han deteriorado la vida de las y los mexicanos durante los últimos 30 años. Eso es lo que nos hemos propuesto desde diciembre de 2018. Estamos por dar a conocer el programa integral para prevenir, atender, sancionar y erradicar la violencia en contra de las mujeres 2021-2024. Dicho programa se desprende del Plan Nacional de Desarrollo y anuncia medidas concretas con responsabilidades y tiempos específicos para responder de manera puntual y precisa a la necesidad de construir una sociedad libre de violencia para las mujeres. En nuestro caso, esta tarea es de reconstrucción tanto de la sociedad como del Estado, que pasa, en primer lugar, pasa por el desmontaje de un sistema de privilegios que ha desequilibrado catastróficamente a la sociedad con la mayor carga de esta tragedia en las espaldas de las clases subalternas. Ese sistema de privilegios se niega a desaparecer y está usando todos los instrumentos a su alcance para anular los esfuerzos del nuevo gobierno, pero no lo vamos a permitir. Las mujeres estamos en el centro de la transformación. Las mujeres estamos en el centro de la cuarta transformación. Por eso, los retos para nosotras son inmensos, pero nuestra voluntad de cambio y de justicia es inquebrantable. Para nosotras, la superación de los prejuicios atávicos asociados con la persistencia de las sociedades tradicionales tiene en el sistema educativo su principal apuntalamiento. En nuestra historia, el sistema educativo nacional ha sido la palanca recurrente para impulsar transformaciones radicales. Sin embargo, el cambio en los valores no se puede generar al mismo tiempo si no se actúa en las demás esferas que provocan los cambios que necesitamos como sociedad para impulsar una sociedad más justa, más incluyente y más participativa. Decimos, una sociedad será más democrática en tanto garantice una mayor participación de las mujeres.
Apologies, Fabiola.
En la cuarta transformación,
do you mind summarizing your next point?
Okay. En la cuarta transformación, las mujeres estamos en el centro de las decisiones. Muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad. No.
Thank you so much for highlighting some of the progress that has been made in Mexico. And now I would like to move forward to Lucio Rosero. We know that feminists and women's rights defenders across the world have been in the forefront challenging violence against women, and they promoted the progressive agenda on achieving equality. So for you as a human rights defender yourself and someone who works directly with women human rights defenders, could you reflect on the experience supporting women's rights defenders and also just women's rights in general in Latin America? And further, could you share with us ways that the situation has evolved over the decades since Beijing for women's rights defenders? Over to you, Rocio Rosero. You could just unmute your mic.
Muy buenos días, buenas tardes. Un gusto encontrar a nuestras amigas, colaboradoras, compañeras de toda la vida. Es un lindo tema, definitivamente, el poder compartir hoy, aunque sea unos cortos minutos, estas hazañas que hacemos gracias a la persistencia de nuestra lucha feminista. Y no solamente en América Latina, yo ahora voy a hablar de América Latina, pero siempre estamos hermanadas las mujeres a nivel global. Creo que hemos sido el primer movimiento social globalizado. En el caso de América Latina, el trabajo de las organizaciones feministas y defensoras de los derechos humanos de las mujeres tiene una trayectoria que se remonta a más de 4 décadas y que ha creado múltiples dispositivos para garantizar nuestra participación activa en distintos niveles y mecanismos, tanto de Naciones Unidas, de los organismos regionales, de Naciones Unidas a nivel internacional, de los organismos regionales como la CEPAL, y dentro de la CEPAL de las distintas conferencias, sobre todo población y la Conferencia de la Mujer. Esto es muy importante porque esto nos ha permitido efectivamente empujar y poner en marcha la plataforma de Beijing, la CEDAW, las recomendaciones específicas que han ido saliendo a lo largo de la historia de la construcción de los derechos humanos de las mujeres. También hemos hecho un trabajo muy importante en los países. Hemos trabajado para la creación de una institucionalidad pública, de marcos legislativos adecuados con los estándares y principios de la legislación internacional de derechos humanos de las mujeres. Hemos trabajado en reformas constitucionales, reformas legales, creación de leyes de primera, segunda generación para abordar el tema, que es una lacra en el caso de la región latinoamericana, que es el feminicidio. Y hemos tenido, diría yo, una participación muy activa y tenemos, obviamente, hemos conseguido unos impactos significativos en los distintos niveles de los gobiernos, de los estados, tanto en el nivel central como en el nivel regional y en las distintas funciones del Estado. Nuestra meta siempre es ir avanzando hacia la democracia paritaria. Todavía las cuotas están en proceso de aplicación. En algunos países nos sirven para acelerar los procesos. En otros lugares todavía tenemos que reinventar las cuotas dentro de los esquemas de la aplicación de la paridad. Nosotros tenemos que decir que América Latina es la región más desigual del mundo. Como ha dicho mi colega de México, el crimen organizado, la corrupción, el deterioro de los sistemas políticos y de gobernabilidad democrática es grande. Hemos tenido en varios países de la región, durante la época prepandemia, un conjunto de movilizaciones sociales que manifiestan el descontento por las desigualdades estructurales de los modelos vigentes. Desigualdades estructurales que limitan derechos, limitan profundamente el acceso a derechos y generan condiciones de pobreza, de empobrecimiento permanente y modelos basados en el extractivismo, por ejemplo, que lo que hacen es acelerar las condiciones de violencia estructural en donde las mujeres y las niñas son las que sufren mayores consecuencias. Si bien al comienzo de los 2000 se logró algunos avances, ahorita en este momento con la pandemia es una situación muy difícil. La desigualdad estructural se está agravando aún más en las condiciones actuales y siempre en esas condiciones la mayor desventaja llevamos las mujeres. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos a cargo de los cuidados, los servicios de cuidado prácticamente de los estados, de los gobiernos en los distintos niveles no están funcionando y por lo tanto con menos recursos, fuera de empleos decentes, las mujeres siguen atendiendo los cuidados en condiciones muchas veces de confinamiento y de convivencia con quienes están violentando a las mujeres y las niñas. Creo que también es importante señalar que algunos países de la región ven amenazadas la paz y la convivencia democrática. Hay violaciones de derechos humanos sistemáticas que se producen y hay la negación sistemática del acceso a los derechos en materia legislativa, por ejemplo, el derecho a decidir, la propia seguridad y la propia situación de las defensoras de derechos humanos. Vemos con mucha preocupación que se han expandido en la región, visiones conservadoras, políticas religiosas, bloques legislativos y muchas componendas que también se han terminado por expresar de varias maneras en la CSW, por ejemplo, en esta última reunión, nuevamente se quiere recortar, neutralizar, retroceder en las, digamos, en las adopciones ya tomadas, en el lenguaje acordado y disminuir los derechos de las mujeres. Queremos decir entonces que detrás de todas esas apuestas lo que existe es una puja permanente para que los gobiernos y la sociedad limite los derechos básicos de las mujeres. Esta es frente a nuestra lucha por la garantía del Estado como protector de los derechos, existe pues esta contrafuerza que está trabajando para limitar los derechos y para cambiar la legislación, para tumbar la institucionalidad, para privatizar los servicios de salud y de educación, de manera de que las mujeres nos quedemos francamente desprotegidas. Y en ello cuenta muchísimo todos los servicios de protección, todos los servicios básicos, del piso básico de protección social, y no hablemos de la situación de crisis que tenemos, por ejemplo, en Ecuador, con un recorte esencial de los servicios de atención a víctimas de violencia. Pero nosotras queremos decir que en América Latina, que existen más de 80 redes regionales de jóvenes, de personas LGBTIQ+, de mujeres afrodescendientes, indígenas, de todas las diversidades, educadoras, abogadas, la red de salud de las mujeres, es decir, esta gran expresión de redes feministas, ¿verdad? Nosotras que hemos luchado, hemos aprendido y hemos reconocido en estos aprendizajes la posibilidad de ir reafirmando y positivando nuestras luchas y nuestros espacios, también estamos siendo atacadas ferozmente. Tenemos que decir que las compañeras en particular, las defensoras de derechos sexuales y reproductivos, enfrentan riesgos como el acoso, la discriminación, el estigma, la penalización y la violencia física. En algunos países, como consecuencia de su trabajo, las defensoras sufren permanentemente acoso, intimidación y violencia física. Las defensoras también pueden enfrentar riesgos adicionales desde sus propias familias y comunidades, y esto es lo que sucede como una limitante, por ejemplo, para nuevas lideresas que quisieran incursionar en la política. La violencia intrafamiliar, la violencia de género, la violencia política nos está también asediando. Y por supuesto que son objeto de ataques de grupos religiosos y de grupos extremistas que pueden acusarlas y promover procesos de judicialización. Que hablemos de las compañeras defensoras de los derechos de la naturaleza. Y esto sucede con las defensoras del agua, de la selva, de que se mantengan sus territorios ancestrales. Están siendo desplazadas de sus comunidades, despojadas de sus familias. Están en situaciones de extrema violencia y prácticamente soltadas a otros sitios, perseguidas, criminalizadas. En este contexto nos parece que es muy difícil avanzar si es que los estados en la vuelta de la pandemia, en la recuperación económica, no regresan por la vía que corresponde. La vía que corresponde es hacerse cargo de la protección de los derechos humanos de las personas, poniendo en el centro a las mujeres. No puede ser que la violencia de género contra mujeres y niñas en Ecuador, por ejemplo, tenga un costo anual de 4.600 millones de dólares y que la respuesta de un gobierno sea pagar la deuda de 4.600 millones de dólares y de destinar 4,5 millones para la atención de las víctimas, las casas de acogida y lo que tiene que funcionar como básico. Estos son los esquemas que tenemos que cambiar. La prioridad es la dignidad y la vida de las niñas y las mujeres en nuestros países. En el caso del Ecuador hemos planteado un pacto fiscal es decir, que se protejan los recursos de inversión, porque al Estado le está costando muy caro el atender la violencia, al Estado, a las empresas, a las familias y a las comunidades. Para ello tenemos que parar, tenemos que cambiar la situación y la perspectiva en este sentido es una perspectiva de recuperación, poniendo en el centro los derechos humanos de las personas, los derechos humanos de las niñas y las mujeres en el mundo. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for highlighting one of the impacts of COVID-19 on women and girls. You highlighted that there's been an increase in unpaid care work, for example, for women and girls, and also for highlighting some of the tremendous work that women's rights defenders have done over the years, but also showing us that they're doing the work, but they're facing violence as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. And now this marks the end of our first segment. We've looked at our situation right now, the situation in Mexico, the global situation, but also the situation for women's rights defenders. So now I'd like us to move into our second segment. We've seen that violence against women and girls is clearly a barrier for us to achieve an equal future, for us to achieve a peaceful and developed world. And this has been faced by another pandemic, COVID-19, which is posing as also a threat for this equal future that we're trying to achieve. So in this segment, we'll look at our key priorities and actions needed to achieve an equal future, but also considering that we're living in a pandemic. So first, I would like to invite Sarah Schlitz, who is the State Secretary for Gender Equality, Equal Opportunity and Diversity in Belgium, to share with us what do you think are your key priorities to address gender-based violence, and what urgent actions do we need to promote between governments, movements, and the civil society to prevent violence against women and girls?
Thank you. Do you hear me? Okay. I'm very
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, nice. Hi, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm very honored to participate in the Generation Equality Forum. I would like to thank the UN Women and the host, Mexico, as well as France, for taking forward the Beijing Platform for Action commitments and shape them into powerful multi-stakeholder action coalitions. Belgium is proud to bring its commitments to the fight against gender-based violence and to the fight for bodily autonomy and sexual reproductive health and rights. I am extremely happy to see the engagement with the civil society, particularly with feminist organizations and youth. During a discussion in a panel organized in the frame of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, a Namibian activist, Twapewa Kadikwa, said that she doesn't like the concept of the shadow pandemic when talking about the gender-based violence because it makes it secondary compared to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I hope we can have an honest and interactive conversation on how to tackle the pandemic of gender-based violence and on what are the necessary steps to counter it during the COVID-19 crisis, but also the structural responses to stop it. As regards to your question, Jennifer, there are several important international priorities regarding to the fight against gender-based violence that we should advocate for and implement together. Firstly, Belgium committed to swiftly ratify the International Labour Organization Violence and Harassment Convention. We also support its ratification by the European Union and work on encouraging other countries to ratify it. This is important to make the workplace everywhere in the world free from violence and harassment, and importantly, gender-based violence, and we need everybody on board. Secondly, and this is my priority as State Secretary for Gender Equality, we are currently working on a comprehensive national action plan against gender-based violence, fully compliant with the Istanbul Convention. The plan responds to the recommendations issued by the Council of Europe Review Committee and the feedback from the civil society. In the spirit of the convention, the policies will take into account intersectional discriminations. Given the pushback against the convention, we need both the governments and the civil society to voice its support for the important international instrument. Thirdly, at the international level, we are committed to elaborate and implement the fourth National Action Plan, Women and Peace Security, with action lines that promote the meaningful participation of women in decision-making as regards to peace and security and the protection of women and girls in all their diversity from conflict-related sexual violence that is regrettably used as a weapon to target civilians, especially political, ethnic, or religious minority groups, and has to be recognized as such and accounted for. Belgium will continue to actively work towards the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and its successor realization. Over to you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really like the fact that you pointed out that we shouldn't be calling it a shadow pandemic because it's not secondary to COVID-19. It should also be a priority. And also for highlighting the importance of having women participating in key decision-making positions, and that being one of your priority areas, as well as the concept of intersectionality, because I truly believe that we cannot eradicate violence against women and girls without looking at how gender intersects with other inequalities. So thank you so much for highlighting those key priority areas. And now I would like to move on to the law perspective. Over the years, we've seen change in legislation as many countries have made commendable efforts by developing progressive policies and laws to promote gender equality. In Malawi, for example, since 1995, we've seen they've developed the National Gender Policy, the Gender Equality Act, as well as the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. So I'd like to find out from you, Honorable Justice Zuonintaba, as a High Court Judge, the Office of the Chief Justice, what is in your experience as a High Court judge, what would you propose as key priorities, and what has been your experience from a law implementation perspective?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm hoping everybody can hear me clearly. Greetings from the warm heart of Africa, Malawi, and I greet you from Zomba, which is one of the mountain cities that we have. And it's kind of cold at the moment. But let me highlight that my background before was a prosecutor or a civil litigator on behalf of government, and then moving to the judiciary, I have realized that in terms of the priorities we need as a judiciary to combat gender-based violence, and more so during this COVID time, is the fact that we need a judiciary that is gender responsive. And when I mean gender responsive, I just don't mean by having the necessary laws and policies that guide gender issues in the country or in the judiciary, but also ensuring that there's diversity within that judiciary. That means having enough women and having enough persons that represent all the other individuals in our society to ensure that we administer the kind of gender responsive justice that we need. We also have to realize that as the judiciaries, we also need to have what I call capacitated judicial officers and judicial staff. And that doesn't only require that when we capacitate judicial officers and judicial staff, we also have to add law enforcement. And in law enforcement, when you talk of gender-based violence, you're looking at the police, you're looking at social welfare officers, you're looking at child protection workers, you're looking at even people from the hospital who are in the one-stop centers that are servicing women and children or persons who have been subjected to gender-based violence. And that means we have to have proper systems, proper processes, proper staff, equipment, as well as finances. And I think when we talk about finances, that's one of the areas that a lot of our countries are not capacitated in terms of whether you talk about the judiciary, you talk about the executive, or you talk about the legislature. In order for us to fight this pandemic of gender-based violence, there is need for resources to be put in. And the judiciary is one of those areas that a lot of times does not get the necessary resources. I also think we need to prioritize the speedy prosecution of offenses. And when I mean prosecution, let us not just focus on the criminal aspect. There are a lot of civil aspects that go with gender-based violence that are not undertaken. And throughout the process, I'll talk about it at the end, we've realized that civil justice has a big component in gender-based violence in itself. And we also need to have a good data collection system in the judiciary. And our case management system has to be able to track our cases, work with our numbers, follow our cases, because you do realize that the cases that find themselves in the judiciary are not necessarily the same cases. The numbers don't tally with what is actually reported in the health center or the health sector, or those that are reported actually in the police. There's a lot of attrition in between from reporting the crime to when it comes for us to be prosecuted. And that's a very big policy issue for any country, and judiciaries should be part of that policy decision and should provide feedback into the policy that encompasses how gender-based violence should be managed, programmed, and implemented in our country. And I would also want to state that when you look at the concept of what is necessary for a gender-responsive judiciary, you also have to realize that although we have policies and legislation that are very good on paper, there are certain parts of it are still going to have to go through what we call reforms. Our penal code is one of those, and that's not the only one. You will look at the fact that the judiciaries need to be able to understand that certain cases will come as general cases, but they will have a major gender component, and as such might have to go for constitutional interpretation or amenable to what we call strategic impact litigation. I would say, for instance, one of our biggest concepts in how gender-based violence was perpetrated by using an offense under the penal code, what we used to call a rogue and vagabond offense, which usually would target sex workers. It will round up sex workers, and those sex workers would then get violated within the system. And having those kind of laws being subjected to judicial scrutiny is necessary. And I think that's a big priority for us as judiciary. And lastly, in terms of priorities for judiciary, I think we need to ensure that our countries have a good referral system, because that referral system will ensure that once a person has moved in from the health sector to police, then to the judiciary, that's not the end of them. There are certain things that we order. We order counseling, we order psychosocial help, economic empowerment issues. That system has to be able to be linked within the judiciary system itself. And I think those are critical areas and priorities that we as judiciaries need to ensure we have, or at least be working towards. And so in terms of law, that's what I would say in terms of key priorities for the judiciary are. And I hope in this COVID time that our judiciaries are being flexible and innovative. Because that requires a lot of places, like in our country, we've had to do a lot of cases through Zoom for the High Court at least, or travel to spaces in order to ensure that the gender-based violence cases are upheld or are being taken care of. And that's something that's significant, that during this time that we need to be flexible and we need to be innovative. So not just having the cases through Zoom, but I've had cases through teleconference where you've had lawyers call in, clients call in over the phone, where you connect them through a teleconference and have a court case, make sure that people are being serviced throughout the system, and that COVID doesn't stop the service that they actually and positively need in order to address the human rights violations that they've gone through. I think that for now, that's what I could say, but I'm hoping that when you look at the concept, how the law has been implemented throughout, when I take a consideration in terms of the Beijing platform and how things have changed in Malawi, I'd significantly say they have changed a lot. I look at a case in 1997 where a brother judge in a defilement case stated that an African woman can never say no. So when they say no, they actually mean yes. And that was a judgment that was passed through the court system. But now I see the judgments that are coming from fellow female judges and brother judges that are very innovative. Only last week, we had a very innovative sexual harassment case delivered by one of my brother judges, which has transcended the concept of sexual harassment and how we should look at it in terms of employer and employee relationships. And I think for us as judiciaries, I think that is fundamental, that we do change the trajectory of people through their implementation and the promotion of the rule of law and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Ntaba, for sharing that with us and for highlighting some of the changes that have occurred since 1995 to now in terms of the judgments, and also for sharing some of your key priorities, which are for the judiciary to be more gender responsive, for us to allocate resources, and also the need for speedy prosecution. And now I'd like to move on to Jida Anani. So we know that overcoming violence against women and girls requires the involvement of several key players: the state, the private sector, the civil society, the media, academia. All these play a critical role in ensuring that we end violence against women and girls. So from a civil society perspective, what are the key priorities and actions that you would promote to prevent violence against women and girls?
Yeah, thank you so much. Quite humbled to be among you all. Needless to say that humanitarian emergencies, natural disasters, and global pandemics put vulnerable groups, especially women and children, at increased risk and exposure. And the current COVID-19 crisis and its related global economic crisis is surely no exception. So GBV is one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating forms of human rights violation in our world today. And it occurs in every country around the world and affects every house. Undoubtedly, the best way to achieve peace everywhere is by simply reducing violence everywhere. And the best way to reduce gender-based violence and eliminating gender inequalities is by involving everyone, and literally everyone, and engaging actively and effectively both sides of the equation of equality, women and men, and ensuring leaving no one behind. So GBV is holding us back, and it's time to come together around a commitment to meet the multiple global commitment, among other the call to action goal by 2025, and to build a violent-free future. Fostering the protection against women and girls and other vulnerable groups is only the right thing to do, but also a smart investment to make, and it's definitely possible. The evidence is violence is still on the rise. And the question is, what we know is what we know, only the top of the iceberg. And the evidence is as well, we know how to prevent it. But the question is, are we all playing the right and full responsible role to step up political will and tangible actions? The evidence is preventing and reducing protection risks and violence and investing in peace is a sound investment. But the question is, where are we investing and in what and how? In my modest opinion and from civil society activism perspective, what has been done thus far is huge and reflective of massive coordinated effort on multiple levels. However, we can surely know much more and do even greater by first assessing our interventions fearlessly through the lens of the right holders themselves to ensure their engagement, voice, and prioritization of their concerns. Secondly, ensuring gender-sensitive, holistic, and intersectional interventions to increase effectiveness and efficiency and sustainable impact. Third, building strong mechanism for follow-up and accountability, while engaging local stakeholders, particularly women-led and women rights CSOs and girl-led groups and networks in the identification, development, and evaluation of any follow-up and accountability processes. Fourth, fostering safe and people-friendly communication of information and reporting mechanisms to ensure it's accessible to all. Multiple people know about services, they lack ability to access the services because simply they lack the ability to receive the proper communication about the availability and the way of reaching out to these services. Fifth, and most importantly, innovation. Innovating and context adapting GBV prevention and responses activities to sustain efforts to stop violence before it starts by questioning and addressing gender social norms in order to promote the principles of human dignity, gender equality, and non-discrimination in a transformative way. Six, ensure effective application of state due diligence principle, and in practice, not in literature, meaning designing our programming around fostering real state autonomy and accountability as outcomes rather than dependency and non-cumulative memory of experiences. 7, invest in people rather in numbers. Again, invest in people rather than in numbers. Not acknowledging people's aspirations, potentials, capacities, and priorities will not lead us to a brighter future where they lead on its building. What is needed is an acceleration of action, political will, and an increase in smart, data-driven investment. Ending gender-based violence is definitely the right thing to do, a smart investment to make, and it's definitely possible with everyone joining forces around. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So it's clear that we need action, we need political will, we need data, and we also need to make sure that we're taking an intersectional approach as we're doing that. So now I would like to move on to Catalina Devantes, the ambassador of Costa Rica to the United Nations. As an ambassador to the UN, how do you see your role and your priorities to prevent violence against women and girls? And what are the key actions you see are needed?
Muchas gracias, Jennifer. Yo voy a tomar la palabra en español para que nos dé tiempo de las traducciones. Es un placer para mí poder participar y conversar sobre cuál es el papel desde la discusión multilateral que tenemos que jugar las mujeres y el sistema en general para prevenir la violencia. Desde luego, y es indiscutible que hay un rol natural de todo el sistema multilateral para empujar la agenda de la prevención y el combate de la violencia de género, y eso es una agenda que tenemos que mantener a través de los diferentes espacios que tenemos, espacios regionales, espacios internacionales, a través de los mecanismos que están dispuestos, a través de los instrumentos que tenemos y de los compromisos internacionales que han ido siendo desarrollados desde las convenciones, las plataformas, tanto internacionales como regionales, Beijing, la CEDAW, el convenio reciente de la OIT. O sea, nosotros tenemos todo un instrumental multilateral que tenemos que poner y que tenemos que seguir empujando como mujeres líderes, pero no solo como mujeres líderes, sino contando con toda la solidaridad del sistema multilateral. Nosotros necesitamos mantener el eje central en que este es un tema obviamente de derechos humanos, que es una crisis grave, que tiene unas manifestaciones multifacéticas, está presente en todos los países, está presente en todas las formas, o sea, tenemos formas más graves y estructurales, evidentemente como la violencia que se manifiesta en las mutilaciones genitales femeninas, en los feminicidios, pero que la crisis no está siendo contenida, que tenemos una situación que tenemos obviamente que mantener con la participación, y yo creo que este ha sido un elemento clave. El espacio multilateral también tiene que traer la evidencia, la discusión, nutrirse de la conexión que tiene que tener con el terreno a través de mecanismos como los procedimientos especiales. Les saludo a Dubravka como el trabajo que ella realiza, el trabajo que realizan los órganos de tratados, la información que se puede compartir en mecanismos, por ejemplo, como en el Consejo de Derechos Humanos también, el examen periódico universal. Todos esos son espacios que tenemos que utilizar al máximo para que podamos levantar estos temas, evidenciar cuáles son las preocupaciones, evidenciar y denunciar también cuáles son los retrocesos que se están evidenciando desde el espacio multilateral, cómo vemos que los países pueden estar retrocediendo, y en nuestra labor de monitorear, de mantener la vigencia de los temas, pues también está señalar esos incumplimientos o esos retrocesos que se puedan presentar. Y desde luego un tema muy importante que han levantado muchos de ustedes es la defensa de quienes están en el frontline defendiendo los derechos de las mujeres. Es decir, cómo el sistema internacional y desde el multilateralismo tenemos una obligación, un papel fundamental para proteger a las defensoras de los derechos de las mujeres. Y yo creo que esto cada vez más tiene que ser una parte central del trabajo que se hace desde el sistema, en particular desde el sistema de Naciones Unidas, y que en nuestro rol como embajadoras y representantes de los países tenemos que mantener como una prioridad. Ahora, esto tiene que ver también con cómo nosotros dentro de nuestras prioridades incluimos y mantenemos el principio de la participación como un eje central. Para avanzar necesitamos definitivamente trabajar directamente con las organizaciones y las defensoras de derechos humanos, y necesitamos que su trabajo nutra nuestro trabajo, y respetar ese espacio de participación significa impulsar que las mujeres estemos en cargos de decisión, que las defensoras de derechos humanos estén presentes en todos los paneles, en todas las discusiones. No podemos tener discusiones multilaterales en una burbuja. Esas discusiones evidentemente tienen que estar informadas con la realidad, con los desafíos y con los dramas que enfrentan las mujeres en el terreno, las defensoras y desde luego las víctimas, que son las que tenemos que proteger a toda costa. Necesitamos información en tiempo real, y mejorar esa comunicación pasa a través de esos enfoques participativos. Enfoques que se nutren, como decía, también con el trabajo que realizan diferentes agencias o entidades de Naciones Unidas. Hay una necesidad, además, de que promovamos la cooperación. Necesitamos más recursos, se dijo, necesitamos promover y fortalecer la cooperación y también la creación de capacidades. Nosotros necesitamos fortalecer las capacidades las capacidades nacionales para poder enfrentarse a las diferentes crisis, acompañadas de recursos financieros, pero también de recursos humanos suficientes, con la capacidad suficiente para atender las crisis. Y además tenemos que tener la capacidad, yo creo, en nuestro trabajo de identificar cuáles son las prioridades. Y creo que el trabajo del sistema multilateral puede contribuir muchísimo a ir poniendo de manifiesto cuáles son las crisis que nos están impactando de mayor manera. Evidentemente podemos hablar de, como ya había mencionado, la mutilación, pero también podemos hablar de situaciones particulares, los feminicidios, las esterilizaciones forzosas, por ejemplo, que enfrentan las mujeres con discapacidad, que se tienen que ir poniendo de manifiesto y en el tapete cada vez más. ¿Esto a qué responde? Y lo quiero poner en el contexto también del COVID. Nosotros en la crisis de la pandemia nos hemos dado cuenta del impacto tan tremendo que ha tenido la disrupción, cómo se interrumpieron los servicios de apoyo. Rocío hacía un llamado, yo creo, fundamental al tema del fortalecimiento de la protección social, que desde mi punto de vista es fundamental para poder avanzar, es decir, sin los servicios de apoyo, sin el acompañamiento, todas estas protecciones que se desvanecieron y se cayeron y que vimos lo frágiles que eran con la pandemia, pues bueno, ¿cómo nosotras podemos en el contexto de una crisis utilizar esta crisis como una oportunidad para fortalecer esos mecanismos y desde luego para tratar de tener una reconstrucción mejor, este Building Back Better del que nosotras estamos, o las que se está hablando ahora en la comunidad internacional? El Building Back Better o esa reconstrucción mejor no va a suceder si no hay una participación de las mujeres y en toda su diversidad. Y yo creo que esto es muy importante. Nosotras tenemos que lograr, dentro de las estrategias para la recuperación y para hacer sostenible esta recuperación y para poner de relieve el costo que tiene la violencia para las comunidades, tenemos que reconstruir pensando en todas las mujeres. Esto lo decía la última panelista. ¿Cómo vamos a pensar en la diversidad? ¿Cómo vamos a apañar las desigualdades estructurales, efectivamente, que son las causas de raíz? O sea, ¿cuál es el problema de raíz que tenemos? La violencia no está pasando en un ambiente cerrado, en una burbuja, ajeno a todo lo demás, ¿no? Desde luego que la violencia responde a causas estructurales.
Catalina, because of time, I'll try and get that you finish.
I will finish in a minute. I'm just, estoy haciendo solo el cierre. Es precisamente atendiendo a esas causas estructurales, atendiendo a la diversidad de las mujeres, que vamos a poder avanzar y que necesitamos que esta crisis se convierta en una oportunidad para avanzar en una mejor reconstrucción. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much once again, and for highlighting the issue of looking at structural inequalities and making sure that we're involving women and looking at the diversity of women as well, and also the need for capacity building, need for resources, and also coordination and cooperation and the involvement of all key stakeholders. So now I would also like us to continue looking at the need for the involvement of different stakeholders, but now focusing on the private sector. And I would like to invite Celine Bonnier, who's the Executive Director of Caring Foundation, just to mention from your perspective, what are your key priorities and actions that need to be promoted to prevent violence against women and girls?
Thank you, Jennifer. Buenos días a todos. Quisiera agradecerle su invitación al Gobierno de México y a ONU Mujeres. I feel very honored to be part of this forum, of this panel, and to be a leader of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, alongside Rida from Abad, who spoke before. So just a few words about the Caring Foundation. It was founded 13 years ago, and it's exclusively dedicated to combating violence against women. It's a corporate foundation, so we receive our funding from the Caring Group, which is a global luxury company. And we are positioned between these two worlds, the private and the non-profit, so we can take an active and complementary role to government and civil society. To answer to your question, Jennifer, our strategy is to act with key feminist partnerships, and we focus on three main priorities to achieve transformative change. We put the survivors' needs at the center of our action. It is crucial to provide holistic support through comprehensive multi-sectoral response and coordination between healthcare, police, the justice, the child protection system, and also ensuring the economic autonomy of survivors, which is critical, even more so during COVID. So we need to fund and strengthen the women's rights organizations that are working directly with women. And as the private sector, we can identify initiatives, support pilot programs, and then replicate these models. So I want to share a simple and very impactful model. Our partner in Mexico, Las Palmas, the founder, Rosalia, created a social bakery. It's a safe space where women learn how to bake bread while developing tools to deal with gender-based violence through listening, support, and empowerment. Second, beyond this extremely important work of supporting women survivors, we also must turn our attention to addressing the root causes and preventing violence in the first place. And to do that, as Rida was mentioning it, we need to take a feminist approach in working with the youth and in particular with young men and boys. We must change the harmful norms and promote healthy masculinity from a very young age. These are key drivers for gender equality. And that's why we work in partnership with Promundo. We target younger boys from 4 to 13-year-olds because we know that restrictive ideas about boyhood are reproduced from generation to generation in families, in schools, in the media. And these messages are also harmful for boys themselves. So we have to break this pattern. And third, we must also take collective action and mobilize the corporate sector. So at Caring, we believe that as a company, it is our responsibility to offer a safe and supportive workplace for survivors. So after training our teams on the impact of domestic violence for several years, we have launched a Caring Global Policy on Domestic Violence that offers all employees experiencing domestic violence a package of support measures, working, of course, closely with the specialist organizations. And 3 years ago, we've co-funded the 1 in 3 Women. It's the first network of companies committed to combating violence against women. So the Caring Foundation is completely in line with the priorities that have been agreed on in the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, with a comprehensive focus on all forms of violence, and of course, an intersectional approach. And I invite other private sector companies to come on board to make strong and action-focused commitments to gender equality by joining as commitment makers. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine, and that is incredible work that you're doing. I think it's important that we support, for example, feminist movements, young feminist movements that are doing incredible work as well. So now I want to move on to Jaha Dukure, who is the UN Women's Regional Goodwill Ambassador for Africa, as well as the founder and executive director for Safe Hands for Girls in Gambia. So we know that there's not a single factor that really contributes to gender-based violence. It is a combination of drivers operating at different levels of the social ecology. But I'd like us to focus on harmful cultural practices that are occurring in different parts of the world, specifically female genital mutilation. So what urgent actions do you think we need to put in place to prevent violence against women and girls, particularly in addressing harmful practices like female genital mutilation?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for having me, and thank you to UN Women as well as the entire Generation Equality Forum teams. Personally, I think organizations, governments, and civil society in general needs to move away from just pledging allegiance to women's rights issues and making a commitment to actually seeing this end. Because as you look at around the world, there's no shortage of perfect laws on paper. But when it comes to implementation, there's a huge problem in most countries. And also Safe Hands for Girls, which is the organization that I founded, is a survivor-led nonprofit organization that is led by survivors. And I think as many speakers have already said, it is important that we support women who are at the forefront of these campaigns. You look at a continent like Africa, for instance, where we have the most amount of female genital mutilation. A lot of times solutions are imported into communities rather than giving communities the power to address these issues themselves. A lot of times women who have the lived experience of some of these harmful traditional practices are the biggest experts on how to end it, because they understand their cultures better, they understand their bodies better, and they understand religious leaders and traditional leaders. And it is important that we invest in them. It is important that we believe them. It is important that we know that they are the answer to the change that we've been seeking for decades or even centuries. Female genital mutilation and child marriage are two issues that I'm deeply passionate about. I went through female genital mutilation when I was 1 week old, and I was a child bride twice in my life. But one of the things that I've noticed is over the years, we constantly struggle for people to hear us, for people to support our works, or even though time and time again, African youth groups have shown how effective their work has been, but there's no data to back that. And a lot of times when you have people that are passionate about certain work and know how to end these practices, they might know how their communities work, but they are not the groups that can write you the fancy 5-page reports or the glossy reports that the donor community needs. And to me, I think the urgent actions that are needed in order for us to see an end to harmful traditional practices and even gender-based violence is by ensuring that laws are being implemented, but most importantly, by ensuring that survivors are being supported and we have a duty of care, especially during a time like this when we have a pandemic around the world. One of the key things that we do as an organization is we check in with girls that are part of our program. We do house calls and we do house checkups. And these are all very, very important. Ending harmful traditional practices should be about preventing it, social norm change. It shouldn't be about what do we do when this practice happens. These practices shouldn't be happening anyway. The fact that they're illegal in most countries means that we need the urgent action of governments to ensure that they end.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of taking a survivor-centered approach and really for us to change our social norms so that we shouldn't have violence against women and girls. We shouldn't be having these cases of, for example, child marriages, female genital mutilation. We should be able to prevent them before they happen. So now this is the end of our second segment, and we will move on to our final segment of today, which is the Q&A segment. We've received a number of questions and comments from the audience, and I would like to thank you all for participating and for your comments and contributions. But unfortunately, we will not be able to take all the questions and comments. I'll just read out a few and give the panelists an opportunity to share the answers or contributions. And in addition to answering the questions, I would like each of the panelists to also add a 1-minute idea on what they think should be the key innovative solutions that we should be putting in place to end violence against women and girls. So just a second, I'm going to read some of the comments that were sent through the chat. So the first one we have, it says, it's important to ensure comprehensive and coordinated services and support to violence and to survivors and their children provided by all actors. So the implementation of laws on violence are still a real challenge for victims, their families, because of social, cultural, and religious pressures and services for victims. So could the panelists share with us their experience in terms of service provision and accompaniment of victims, which have been a success in their country? So what are some of your experiences in service provision for survivors of violence? So anybody can take up the question, and in addition to answering the question, you should also share your 1-minute innovative solution or approach for ending violence against women and girls.
May I start with replying to this question?
Yes.
Yes. So we are seeing differences around the world, and I would like to suggest that there is different frameworks in different countries. They are not in line with international human rights standards. So although we do have laws on violence against women and domestic violence, they are not really fully in line with international standards with respect to preventive measures, protection services, and prosecution of perpetrators, and coordination between different agencies and laws at the national level. So there is a lot to do in this area also. For example, in some countries, protection orders are not efficient, shelters are not available, there is no risk assessment done by police in cases of domestic violence. So in each country, we have to see what is missing and what should be done better. And for that reason, I am suggesting establishment of a femicide watch or gender-related killings of women prevention watch. In each state, all cases of such killings, intimate partner killings, family-related killings, should be analyzed. We do not need to have all cases before judges. They should be analyzed immediately when we have such homicides by interdisciplinary panels that would see what was missed and what was not done properly. Is it a problem with law? Is it a problem with implementation of law? Is it a lack of different services and so on? So we need analysis of cases from human rights perspective in order to see how to put laws in line with human rights standards and how to push for implementation of those standards. And at the end, in this area of violence against women, we need to see that during the Beijing conference, violence was one of 12 areas of concern. Today, violence against women and girls should be priority at the UN and each and every UN member state. And we are not yet there. So I am now proposing at the UN to have violence against women as a standing agenda item before the CSW, to use human rights-based approach to address violence against women, and to involve all those mechanisms like my mandate and other mandates that were developed to monitor situation and recommend measures, because we are established to provide such recommendations, but we are not fully involved in the whole process. So my final suggestion is to put violence against women at the top of the agenda and address it from human rights perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Violence against women and girls should be put at the top of the agenda. Thank you. So now, because of time, I will not be able to read all the questions that people had and to give you all an opportunity to answer. I'm just going to read some of the key summaries that came up in today's discussion, and then I'll give each one of you an opportunity to share your 1-minute idea. So it's important to pay attention to reduction of financial resources allocated to national women's machineries during the pandemic when gender-based violence has increased. Political and financial commitments are critical. It's also important to pay attention to violence against adolescent girls, transgender women, and incarceration of women and LGBTQI people during COVID, as they are vulnerable groups. Femicide is rising in many countries. Duty bearers and stakeholders should take serious responsibility in preventing and responding to femicide and address impunity of perpetrators at individual and institutional levels. Finally, we have violence against women happens in public and private spheres. Violence against women and sexual harassment at workplace should be addressed alongside with other types of forms of violence. So these are some of the comments that were shared in the Q&A chat. And right now, I'm just going to mention each panelist at a time for you to share your 1-minute idea. So I'd like to call Fabiola Alani Samano to share her final 1-minute solution to end violence against women and girls. So it really has to be a minute because we're tight on time. So apologies if I cut you off before you finish.
Muchas gracias, Jennifer. Voy a tratar de ser breve, menos de un minuto. Señalar que los feminicidios, y no es tan diferente lo que sucede en otras partes del mundo que lo que sucede en nuestro país. Hemos calculado que el 75% de los feminicidios son íntimos, es decir, son perpetrados por las personas más cercanas a las mujeres, su pareja, su expareja, el pariente, en el caso de los feminicidios infantiles, el tío, el padrastro, el vecino, la gente de mayor confianza, 75%. En el 25% de los casos, los feminicidios son indirectos y tienen que ver más con el espacio público y más con redes asociadas a otro tipo, digamos, de relaciones. En ese sentido, lo que nosotros estamos implementando en México es la prevención. La prevención desde la identificación de las mujeres sobrevivientes de feminicidio, es decir, aquellas registradas como en una carpeta de investigación como tentativa de feminicidio u homicidio en grave tentativa. Esto lo estamos haciendo en coordinación con las fiscalías, con las procuradurías y por supuesto con el sector salud, porque es ahí a donde acuden las mujeres sobrevivientes. Y entonces es posible tener un impacto en el corto plazo si las identificamos, si garantizamos órdenes inmediatas.
Apologies, Fabiola, your time is up.
Muchas gracias. Es eso
okay.
que quería comentar.
And
gracias.
now, because of time, I'm going to cut it from a minute to 30 seconds. So each person has 30 seconds. So I'll move to Honorable Justice Zoe Ntaba. You have 30 seconds to share with us your 1-minute idea.
Okay, my 1-minute idea is something that we're already doing with what we call the Women Judges Association of Malawi. We've been doing what we call bringing the courts closer to the people, because we understand a lot of people are apprehensive about bringing cases or taking their cases through the system. So what we do is we work in what we call strategic partnerships with other players, that is including women lawyers, gender justice unit. We work with the police, we work with social services, and we work with the health sector. Currently, we're running a project that is doing what we call mobile courts in our rural areas in 6 districts under the Spotlight Initiative, which is something that this mobile courts idea has been something that we've been doing for the last three and a half years. And we work within the judiciary by training our judges, our magistrates to do gender responsive judgments and sentencing for gender-based violence cases. And this, as I said, is both in the civil space and in the
All right, thank you so much, Justice Zoe Ntaba.
criminal justice space, because we understand that best. Thank you.
Time is not on our side.
No, I'm done.
Okay, great. And now I'll move on to you, Celine Bonnier, to share with us your 30-second idea.
Okay, thanks. So I'm coming back to one of the things I mentioned. It's about, I think that we need to change mindsets and behaviors, and to do that, we need to work with the younger ones. We need to work with young boys. We need to work with young men. I think that parenting and caregiving programs can offer great pathways to prevent domestic violence and violence against children. And also I want to mention that during the COVID crisis, many organizations have developed really creative online tools. For instance, about sexual education. I mentioned A Toda Voz here in Mexico, who was an amazing sexual education platform for 9 to 16 years old.
All right, thank you. And now to you, Sarah Schlitz, to share your 30-second idea, because we will be kicked out of the meeting soon. So I would like to give everybody an opportunity. So 30 seconds.
Thank you. Gracias por las numerosas intervenciones y preguntas en el chat, and I'm happy to share with you some of the measures we implemented in Belgium. First, the police was asked to follow up on all persons who had filed a domestic violence complaint in the past 3 months. Then we informed the population that the curfew installed does not apply to cases of intimidated partners and domestic violence, as well as boosted the capacity of shelters, including those for LGBTIQ persons, to respond to the question of Christos in the chat. Pharmacies played a vital role in assisting victims. A client asking for a mask 2020 will trigger a special protocol for assisting victims of domestic violence. And to respond to the question of Amina Traoré in the chat, Belgium is also proud of its current rollout of a network of 10 sexual assault care centers. They offer a comprehensive psychological, forensic, and medical care for the victims of sexual violence and respond to the need of more patient-centered care. And I will post in the chat the link to the website. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. And now the last person, apologies, I will not be able to get everybody's 30-second idea because of time. So I will go to Hida Anani to share her 30-second idea, and then we'll close this session.
Thank you so much. Actually, I would like to reinforce the idea that I shared already, which is innovation. We need to think out of the box and really resort to non-traditional and unusual tactics and methodologies to, most importantly, reach the unreachable. We need to think of women and girls in all their diversities. So apply inclusion not only as a motto, but also in the practice, and ensure we really leave no one behind when it comes to women across the border, when it comes to their diversity, special needs, and as well their aspirations and unique situation and their unique context. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And to the panelists and our audience, thank you so much for sharing your ideas. This marks the end of our session. And we've all seen that there's need for urgent action. We need to make bolder commitments. We need to ensure that we're including women, we're supporting women's movements, the feminist movement, and we're building the capacity of women to fight for their rights. So thank you all so much for contributing to a future where she is equal and free from violence. So this is the end. I thought we'd be kicked out, but I think we're still on. But this marks the end of our session. So thank you all so much. It was a great pleasure to moderate this session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Muchas gracias a todas.